The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am so honored to have Maya with us here today. Hi, Ali. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Beth. Thanks for having me here.
So Ali has been a student and teacher of world mysticism traditions and indigenous shamanism for over 25 years. She integrates her academic training in Buddhist Studies, Comparative Mysticism, and clinical psychology with all she has learned from indigenous healers of North and South America. She guides retreats, teaches programs, and creates music, all guided by the prayer for the alleviation of human suffering and the opening of the human heart in service to creating a healthier, happier world for all. Ali, let's dive right in. The first question I ask all my guests is about your own career path and your healing path, the work you do in the world. I would love to know, did you know you were going to be on this path when you were 7 years old, or were you on a different path completely? What twists and turns have you taken to get to where you are?
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that with you. Well, I always have this sense that I came in as a child with this inner knowing of my purpose and of my path. And it was very alive inside of me, although I didn't have the words in my environment to match it. My parents were very secular, and there really wasn't much in the way of spirituality or transformational consciousness, so to speak, really at all. But it was something that I just innately had a deep kinship with and really sought out from a very early age. So I would kind of find the pieces and find the threads. And my family was very academic and intellectually oriented. So books were in, and, bringing me to the bookstore and just being able to choose whatever books I wanted. And so through that pathway, I found at a pretty early age, Carl Jung and some Buddhist philosophies and different kinds of transformational ideas that really lit me up and just were sort of lights on the path, like clues that I could sniff and follow. And then a major transformation happened for me I grew up in the city in Toronto in Canada, but I would spend my summers out in the wilderness in Canada and doing, wilderness camping experiences. And that is really where I found a lot of spiritual awakening and a lot of connection to nature, to the divine through nature, and to the indigenous spirits that were very alive there. So that was very illuminating for me and showed me aspects of the spiritual world, and spiritual realities opened up to me through spending time out there that showed me what is possible. And then when I was 17, I had managed to discover this very profound transformational school in the Alps of Switzerland that's based in Eastern spirituality and just out in nature, natural living. And I just knew this was my place. They had courses in Buddhist meditation and quantum physics and African drumming. And I just thought, these are my people. I've got to go find them. So my family was supportive enough to allow me to go there. And I remember being on the airplane at 17, and I heard this very strong, clear voice in my mind that said, I don't know exactly what meditation is, but I know I need to learn it and I need to practice it every day. So that's exactly what I did. And I also learned yoga and started doing cleansing and fasting and cleaning my diet. And I really stopped ingesting any kind of substance at all. Just meditation, yoga, breath work, cleansing, poetry in the woods, you know, and the wildflowers blooming on the Swiss Alps. It's so magical. And I had a lot of spiritual awakening. I really came home to myself and found myself in a whole new way. And I really stayed on that path of not ingesting any mind-altering plants or substances for years, until a few years after that, I came to the States for college. And I ended up at a very small progressive school called New College in Florida, which I often describe as a combination of Harvard, a rainbow gathering, and Burning Man. And there were lots of psychedelics happening there. And for those of you who know, this is where it's a very small school, but so many meaningful beings in the psychedelic movement come out of there. The MAPS movement, the Arrowhead, they're all from this little school. So that's where I found myself. And I was studying comparative mysticism. And in my meditations, I was getting repeated visions of mushrooms. And they kept, making themselves very present. And so after a while, I got curious and I said, okay, something's trying to communicate with me here. So I had an internal dialogue with these mushroom spirits, and they told me that they were very highly conscious, highly awakened beings that are here to help humanity heal and awaken. And this was a fascinating concept to me. So I went to talk to some of my psychedelically oriented friends, and they said, well, yes, this is what Terence McKenna talks about. This is absolutely, that's what it's about. So I thought, I've got to try this. So I did an experiment, and I went with a dear friend of mine to a national park in Florida on the beach, and we did a intentional ceremony, and it absolutely blew me away with what was possible, especially having such a strong grounding in my meditation practice at that point, and in my transformational tools and expressive arts therapies and shamanic journeying and all the forms of holistic healing that I had cultivated. And so I knew from that time on that these plants were absolutely a part of my path and my life. And so I continued to have, semi-regular, intentional ceremonial experiences for myself with various medicine plants that were around me and available. And I continued to go on to grad school, and I studied to be a clinical psychologist, which I am now. And just looking at the ways that the most powerful pathways of transformation and healing and liberation from suffering that I had encountered, how these can work together with Western psychology in a synergistic way to really accelerate the process and make it much more effective. And so the Buddhist meditation practices, the yoga practices, all the forms of somatic holistic healing, expressive arts therapies, and the plant medicines absolutely just work so magically together. Really a winning recipe when they're held with integrity, with wisdom, with love and compassion. And then I later had the opportunity to go down to Peru and really work with some of the traditional indigenous and mestizo healers and experience ayahuasca and the magic of those plants and how that can fit into this picture as well. So that's really been a part of my personal journey. And I do occasionally bring groups down to Peru or to Costa Rica to work with these plants in this way. And I also weave that into my work as a psychologist, helping people prepare for and integrate for their sessions with medicines, whatever medicines they're working with, because those are such important keys for the experience to go well instead of sideways.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. It's funny. It's quite similar to my own experience, although mine started with acid at a very young age. But I was on a very similar path of awakening since I was a kid, like always exploring and reading, and studied psychology in college. And then by the time I came to ayahuasca in particular, it was like, oh, now all these concepts I've been learning in Buddhism for all these years make sense to me. Meaning like now we can like bring them together and like see them and embody it on a whole new level. But that's where I agree with you. I always look back on my first experience and I say, if I wasn't already meditating and wasn't already on this Buddhist path, I don't think it would have been as powerful as it was.
I absolutely agree with that. And I had that experience when I did meet my first teacher in Peru and started working with him. And the powerful medicine, big cups that they were serving everybody, it was a little bit of a madhouse because these are very big waves of energy and consciousness. And most people did not have the cultivation of skills and tools to surf those waves. But through my meditation practice, I really did. And that was something he always really recognized in me, and then, brought me into inviting to be a part of supporting what they're creating. And so that's a big part of what I teach. How do we surf these waves consciously and make use of everything that arises as an opportunity for deeper healing, deeper awakening, rather than getting stuck?
Yes, or re-traumatized, or even some of the worst stories that I've been hearing. Someone actually wrote me recently and said, because I was sharing a story about my medicine path, and said, Beth, I drank ayahuasca and then I was suicidal for 2 years, and then and we all know, we've all heard these stories, but that's where I believe this discussion around integration and preparation, and not just a session. Like I would say, integration is not having a session beforehand. It's really like the day-to-day living. And I want to ask you about that, especially coming from, a psychedelic informed psychologist. You mentioned somatic work, the meditation path. Let's talk a little bit about this preparation and integration, because it has come up so much, especially as the world is getting, everybody's just diving into these medicines thinking that they're a magic pill, and maybe aren't really ready, or maybe they aren't prepared, or maybe it's, not really the right thing for them. I'm curious, as a professional psychologist, do you believe that these medicines are actually for everybody, or are there certain people that maybe need a different level of preparation? What would you say to people like that?
They're not for everybody, first off. And that's really important. And that's a big piece of, if somebody does have the call, that's obviously a very strong prerequisite. You have to have that internal call. This should not be something anyone else is pressuring you to do, but that you really from within feel this is for you, and you are lit up by it, and you have an intuition that's guiding you to it. That is necessary. And then another necessary piece is to be working with a professionally trained healer, guide, facilitator, shaman that is vetted, that you trust, that has a solid amount of experience and a good reputation. That one of the pieces they will do is screening for physiological health, for psychological health, for all the elements. So there's a lot to check out there. Like, these are two important gateways to pass through before going any further. And then if, those are all check, and we're moving forward, to do the preparation work is can really mean the difference between heaven and hell. It can really mean the difference between having one of those experiences that we all hear about. It's like 10 years of therapy in one night, and sometimes beyond what one could ever receive in therapy. Or, as we mentioned, some of the potential ways that it can just sort of not make use of the full potential, or even worse, cause harm. be re-traumatizing. And, so this is just, it's a topic I'm very passionate about because I look at it like a knife. A knife can be used to heal and save lives if it's in a skilled surgeon's hand and they know what they're doing, it's their scalpel, and actually miracles can be accomplished that are huge blessings. Now, a knife in an unskilled person's hand or in an angry, unconscious person's hand that actually wants to cause harm can cause a lot of damage. So I see these plants in a very similar way. They are beautiful, powerful tools. And when they're used with wisdom, integrity, and compassion, absolute miracles of healing happen. And when they are used with ignorance, with greed, with delusion, with intention to harm, a lot of harm happens. So they're magnifiers. So we do need a little bit more education and refinement in how we're thinking about the plants and how we are working with them to get the results we really want, instead of just naively thinking, oh, just if I take this any place, any way, I'm going to be healed. It's not always like that.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. And it's like what you said about being able to ride the waves. I actually just had an interview before this with someone we both know in common. And I was saying I think the reason why I'm able to navigate not only, ceremony situations that are very challenging, but also life, life as an entrepreneur, life as a human alive in 2023, is really to be able to sit and know how to ride through those very hard moments and not either run or think something's wrong or avoid or numb or, whatever the coping mechanisms are, but to really be able to stay grounded and really go into the challenges. And this is where I believe there's going to be a lot of work to do as psychedelics keep growing in popularity and as people really maybe naively walk into spaces where they're not fully prepared or maybe not with a skilled facilitator, or they're just not in the right mindset or whatever it is. And they have this experience like the person who wrote me saying, this medicine made me suicidal. It's like, well, there was, not to discount that, of course, not diminishing that experience, but to really know, okay, well, maybe there's something else there that didn't happen first. And this is what I help a lot of clients with who are, becoming integration coaches or psychedelic informed coaches or healers, or I actually work with a lot of therapists who are shifting into adding this as an, additional offering about how to navigate and prepare and integrate these journeys, because they can be so big and life-changing and not always, yes, very often for the best, but also in a very challenging way, including, it still happens to me. And I've been on this path for over 30 years. I'm like, I still have challenging experiences that I need to talk to my therapist about. But I'm curious, let's talk about this, because there's so many people stepping into the path of either facilitators or integration coaches or some version of both. I personally do not work with straight up facilitators for many reasons, but I do have clients that maybe do, let's say they'll do a low dose of something or microdosing that's also along with coaching or whatever it is. But what are some really important skills or tips that you have for people who want to make this their career? Like let's say a therapist who's maybe been on this path, who's like, well, wait a second, I want to offer psychedelic integration. What do you say to them?
Mm-hmm. Well, one point to consider is, which plants do they want to be focusing on? And and I think, is your question more around people who want to be offering integration work rather than people who want to be serving medicine?
Yeah, I guess let's talk about the integration first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
People like integration coaching, preparation.
Yeah. Well, one thing that is wonderful is there is such an increasing recognition of the importance of proper preparation and integration in the space. And so there are some great programs out there that are, a year, 2 years that really train people with the skills. So those are available. And I definitely recommend getting educated and getting prepared and finding mentors that will show you your blind spots and maybe areas that you need to strengthen in order to support people through their integration. So that's an important piece. And another important piece is doing our own work. I actually did my doctoral dissertation at CIS on my passion that healers need to heal themselves. We can read all the books and take all the courses and speak the words, but it's actually our verbal communication is such a small percentage of what we're communicating. Most of what we communicate comes through the transmission that people feel in our presence, in between the words, just by being with us. So more than anything, do your own work. Do your own shadow work, because that gets in the way if we don't. It'll come up in harmful ways if we're not intentionally inviting it and welcoming it and working with it. And when more and more layers come up in different situations, trigger different aspects of the shadow, that we have the tools and we have the support system to handle it with integrity and with grace. Do our own integration work. We can really only, share as much as we've embodied on a deeper level.
I'm so glad you bring this up. I was actually just talking to our friend during the interview right before this about this like deeper layers of shadow work that I've been doing lately, where it's like, oh, there's always more. It's like the onion peel. And I always say, show me an ascended master living on earth right now. I don't think there are any. Maybe there's someone out there in the jungle, but there's always layers. And it's interesting. This has come up a lot. Especially being in this psychedelic space around facilitators that maybe aren't doing the work, or there's now so much growth in the desire to want to give back or serve, or maybe they have a very powerful journey and feel called to the medicine. I mean, we've seen and heard everything, and I've been navigating that on my own. Like, how do I really feel about this? Where are my own personal and professional boundaries about who I help and where my limitations are? But at the same time, it's like, well, it's a wild west out there, and I'm not going to be able to stop Joe Schmo from, I don't know, coming up with his own ayahuasca concoction and serving it to a bunch of kids in his living room, and maybe never studied under anybody. But, what do you think about, and I keep calling it, and I don't believe it is like indigenous versus Western, but I do, because I've always studied, the people that I work with are of a Peruvian lineage who quite literally live out in the jungle, and those have been who I've spent most of the time with. So I sometimes will make jokes about like, oh yeah, like the white facilitator having so much ego. But I don't believe it is a white, just like a condition of being the white man. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this? Because I'm sure you've seen everything over the years, and where is there kind of the broken piece here? Why have we heard about so many maybe scandals or, like trauma or unsafe spaces or, unskilled facilitators? Like, what is this all about? And how do you deal with this? Like, do we just let it be? And do you know what I mean? Like, how do you come to your own terms with like the wild west of the medicine space?
It's the wild west. It really is. And it's like that in South America as much as anywhere.
That is true.
I mean, I don't think it really has so much to do with race or skin color. I think that in every culture, we find people with beautiful hearts and high integrity and humility. And in every culture, we find people with delusion and ignorance, and that are just, they're just not awakened beings and how they operate, from everywhere, from just being good at well-intentioned but not very highly cultivated to actually being ill-intentioned. And Lord knows that's happening in South America. There's a lot of trauma and scandal occurring. And so I think that's also important piece of education, is to not romanticize that because somebody is Peruvian or indigenous, that means you're going to be safe with them. So we need this discernment in the North, in the South, in the East, in the West, everywhere we travel, in the physical realm, in the spirit world. So, and I see it as a huge issue, really. I mean, of course, it's so heartbreaking to me to hear stories over and over again, whether it was in Peru or the States or Europe or wherever it may have been, where people actually get harmed. They go for help and they get harmed, and sometimes badly harmed. It's devastating to me because I know what is possible when it's all held and facilitated with love and wisdom and integrity. And it's like a blasphemy, like the most sacred, holy, like turned against wellness, and what to do about it, I think, is a fascinating topic, because I think this is coming up more and more as we start to see these decriminalization and even legalization movements that are recognizing the incredible healing potential that's available, recognizing our need for it and wanting to make that available. And as that's happening, we're really grappling with these questions. Well, how do we bring this through in a way that is reliably safe and effective? And there's this balance point. I mean, as a psychologist, I do have a lot of appreciation for professional ethics, and oftentimes, boards of whatever area, the board of psychology or medicine, they're regulating this. They're keeping an eye on, like, these are our codes of ethics, and let's make sure that our practitioners are upholding them. Now, of course, there's this bureaucracy and there's all kinds of problems with, like, does that actually effectively happen? But I like the idea, and I like the intention to be working towards this. So as psychedelics and plant medicines are coming out in this world, we're looking at, okay, well, what kind of regulations, what kind of code of ethics? And it's important to have something, but at the same time, there's all kinds of tricky areas. And we also don't want to over-regulate or like squash out the spirit or squash out the indigeneity or the magic that's not quantifiable by being overly clinical and overly controlled. So it's just fascinating to watch that dance starting to happen. And, really, really holding the prayer and the vision that we can navigate that in a beneficial way. Because I like the Buddhist phrase, not too loose, not too tight. Just like tuning that string of our guitar to get that right resonance. And it applies to really just about everything. And in this case, if we're too loose, it does become the Wild West. And people with good intentions or not good intentions can cause harm. And if we're too tight, then we can like squash out the magic and the lineage and the spirit and just some of the unique beauty. So just that right balance point is very delicate.
It's such an interesting topic. I actually posted about this on my Facebook personal profile back in, I think, December or January, because someone I know actually violated a code of ethics. And I actually realized, I was like, wait, I don't know what the official code of ethics is when it comes to, this was like therapist-client relationship, romance, and time, there wasn't much time in between, and it really made me stop and think. I was like, okay, let me see what people think and say about this. And I had, I think, over like 250 comments, and everybody weighing in from therapists who were like, never, and then, people who are more, ethically non-monogamous and all about like free love, or like let people do whatever they want. And then it really made me think about this. MDMA is supposedly going to be approved this year, next year for therapy. And when you're working in a one-on-one, especially with some of these medicines, who's to say? Like so far there aren't real ethical boundaries established. And at the same time, I agree with you completely. It's like, even with the legalization, there's been a lot of discussion around, okay, now it's maybe going to be medicines are going to be regulated. So therefore, where does the indigenous ancestral healing practices of certain plant medicines come in? Are those going to be regulated now? Are they not going to be allowed? Or, where's the line drawn? And it's been interesting because it's like a double-edged sword. Like, I believe in freedom and cognitive freedom, and everybody should have the right to choose. But then at the same time, without endangering or harm, or also without putting limitations on, why is it we can work with, psilocybin therapy in a certain setting with only one kind of psilocybin that's controlled by one company, but then I can't work with my shaman who visits from Peru because he's bringing in ayahuasca from over the border? It's an interesting world. So all I keep doing is praying and having discussions about it like this. Mm-hmm. But it's been interesting and, weird and hard to navigate, especially for people that are also trying to step in and do this with integrity. I don't necessarily believe like, okay, well, maybe if someone really did get the call to serve medicine, like, who's to say what's right or wrong? I do believe in, exactly as you said, like, do your own work, go into the shadows, go into the depth. Like, I always say, get your ego in check. The reality is we all have egos, but to get it in check. So I'm curious, coming from, many years experience and leading retreats, where do you see this kind of whole psychedelic industry? And I always put this in quotes because, I've heard it called the ecosystem and the space, but then someone recently said, hey, it's an actual industry because we can't deny it, right? We can't bypass the fact that this is happening. But what are your thoughts on where this is all going? And do you feel like this is still heading in a good direction? Meaning, is this really for the greater good? Or, what are your views on how this might actually affect the world as a whole? Mm-hmm. Like, literally, like planetary change. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, do you ever think about this, or this ever comes up?
Absolutely. This is a very alive and pertinent topic. And I think it remains to be seen. We're at a pivot point right now, which is why I think it's so important to be thinking about it and talking about it and making good decisions. We're at a time where many governments in the world are in a decision-making process. Which way do we go with this? Do we allow it? Do we shut it down? If we do allow it, in what way? By who and how? And starting to witness how things go. Sort of, putting our toes in the water of like, there's Oregon, there's Colorado, there's Australia. What's happening? How are things going? And if they go well, then more places will follow suit. And if there's disasters and traumas and mess ups, then things get shut down again. So it's a very exciting time. And as far as planetary transformation, I do believe that the wise, compassionate practice of engaging with these plant medicines and serving these plant medicines is, in my mind, one of the number one things we could do to awaken human hearts and awaken human consciousness to higher vibrations, out of fear, out of greed, out of trauma, out of paralysis and wounding, and into love, into harmony, into creativity, into compassion, into everything that we so desperately need in the world. And they do this with a tremendous efficiency. I mean, I also use this metaphor that being a therapist is such beautiful work, but it's very slow. It's like digging a ditch with a teaspoon. And we go, okay, well, the mountain of suffering is quite massive and I just have a little teaspoon, but I guess it's all I have. So I'll just do my little teaspoon at a time of movement. And then working with these plants is like having the enormous power tools, and so what can happen is also, which way our planet is going to go. Are we going to wake up and learn how to respect life and respect Mother Earth and the elements? Are we going to wake up and stop killing each other and harming each other out of racism and out of greed and out of illusion? Are we going to start creating a healthier world that's sustainable and more compassionate? That all has to do with our consciousness. And I remember being a teenager and looking at all of the problems of the world and really asking, how am I going to live my life in a way that is going to be of the greatest benefit? And I started looking into politics and activism, as well as being very into spirituality and psychology. And I actually, having experience in both worlds, came to the conclusion for myself, both because of where my personal talents are, and also because of coming to the realization that we actually have the solutions. We have all the sustainable energy solutions. We have all the environmental cleanup solutions. We have models of, how to heal racism, but are we using them? We're not choosing them. And that comes from consciousness. That has to have an internal transformation and awakening in the heart, in the soul, for us to want to make a different choice. So that's where I've been focusing my energies. And as a psychologist, as support to these plant transformational experiences, that's where, in my mind, where it's got to start. So the potential is like, yes, we need this with all of our hearts and all of our prayers for those who choose it as a path. And it's going to go one way or the other, where it's either going to really launch us into that creating the world we really want to create, or people will handle it with ignorance and will just go way backwards and not have this opportunity.
I'm like, no, the plans won't allow that. No, they can't. I mean, you're right. Because I always say that too. It's like, well, this could be, who knows, what is stronger, the heart or the ego, really? It's kind of like you said, it's like we're getting to the root cause. I've been saying this for years. I'm like, I think these discussions around psilocybin will help heal your anxiety and depression. I'm like, you guys, why aren't we talking about what's at the root of the anxiety and depression, which is exactly what you just named? It's the heart, it's the consciousness, it's the disconnection from earth, nature, source. And it's like these very basic, like, what is the root of all these huge problems? And I do, I'm always an optimist where I'm like, no, the plants won't allow that, but I don't know. I don't know how strong the human ego or the human fear is. And I do have this larger vision that like things are going in the right direction and all the problems, I agree. We have the solutions to all the problems and they're there. They will emerge if we actually just slow down and listen and actually maybe communicate with the plants and hear what they have to say and actually take it to heart and not just, come in and use it for hey, I just need to fix my, quick fix for my depression. It's like, no, there's always going to be something more that's coming through.
There's the deeper roots. And it's also no accident, no coincidence that these root issues of how disconnected Western culture is from a way of living in harmony with the earth and with society and within families. Western culture has historically killed its medicine people and violently shut down its connection to a authentic, personal, lived spirituality. And So a lot of the root causes of imbalance in modern Western culture come from a culture that does not have plant medicine rituals, that has lost its indigeneity and is trying to like walk around without this really important root. And so then there's this interest in, for people who are missing that, it needs to be found in another culture. And so then, how do we navigate that respectfully and have sacred reciprocity and not repeat these sort of colonialist patterns, and to honor that, we need to also find that within ourselves, and that is in our roots. And so the return of ceremony, both with and without plant medicines, but of this kind of empowered connection to the sacred and to the divine as a part of our daily life and through Mother Earth is, I think, the start to healing a lot of these root problems that are causing these over the top rates of anxiety and suicide and depression and addiction and everything that we're seeing. So it does both address the root and the branches at the same time.
Oh, so beautifully said. And I agree completely. And I'm so glad you just brought up sacred reciprocity, because this is actually going to be my next question, was about, the one discussion I've had a lot in this kind of medicine world is about money. How does money fit in? Because there is this reality of the world that we live in, at least here in the Western world where we live, where we need money, and it's part of our system, and it's not, as much as we all want it to just, maybe disappear or shift into something a lot more supportive for all of humanity and the earth. It's here right now. And so this discussion's come up where I've seen all extremes. I've had people, by the way, it's the minority. It's usually 1 out of every 5,000 people will say, this should just be free, and no one should charge for plant medicine, and blah, blah, blah. And retreats cost $5,000 now. And I could go on and on. And then there's people that are like, well, and this is partially my viewpoint, is the more that the people who are the voice for the plants or the voice for the earth, or who are doing good in the world, who actually want to create large scale change, I believe they need all the money on the planet, because that's how we're going to change the world. But what are your views on this, and how do we get this right? It's like I've personally been very dedicated to giving back, even long before on this path, but even more so on this path is like, okay, how do I keep it flowing in all directions? But, what do you feel like are some answers, especially for people doing work in this medicine field, whether facilitators or integration coaches or just participants?
That is such a great topic. And yeah, I think this is something we're all sort of refining as a collective our maturity with, and figuring out as we go. And I love that these types of conversations and questions are more and more actively engaged with in our culture. And I think this is also a mark of our evolution, that when we look back at, the 60s and the 70s, this wasn't really something people were talking about very much. And so it's nice to see it evolve, because it is incredibly important that we don't just want to be perpetuating colonialism and this sort of like, as people with white skin or from an external culture going in and taking and not giving back. And I don't have the viewpoint that money is bad. Obviously, it's how our world is structured, and it can create a lot of good. And I suggest it's actually neutral. Now, the danger is when we get into using this powerful energy in ignorance, with egotism and with greed, and as a force of perpetuating suffering in any form. However, when we use this powerful energy source with wisdom and compassion, we can create amazing things that make the world a more beautiful, loving, inspiring, kinder place. So I'm all for that. And I think that that is an important part of sacred reciprocity, to be giving back. Of course, financially is just like a clear, easy way to do that, and support the peoples and the lands that the medicines come from and their health and well-being. And also, it's more than just money. It's also building relationships of friendship and alliance, and having ongoing relationships to be having friendship, having alliance, having mutual support. So we're really lifting each other up, and it's just a win-win for everybody. And it's very possible to create that if we prioritize it.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, this is kind of what I always say is, if you just build it into like every choice you make from day one, meaning like business model, right? Even when you don't have, let's say, the money, but maybe it's a relationship, or maybe it's a support, like just by sharing or showing up, or education, whatever it is. There's many ways to give back. And also, it's like I'm involved in a nonprofit that I don't have a few $1 million to give to it, even though I really wish I did, to be able to just but hey, let me show up and see how I can introduce you to people that have the few $1 million that we need to raise. There's always ways to give back. And I do believe even just having these discussions and having that intention, especially as you step into the medicine path or work of facilitators, again, I've always been very blessed to work with people who tell the whole story of where it's grown, who's making it, where it's, their whole process. I know exactly where everything I bring into my body comes from, and I know the intention behind it. And I know it's not just from some, God knows where. So I always say to people, ask questions, have discussions, ask, who's involved, and are you replanting these plants? And is there some kind of a project to give back, and to keep it going, or whatever it is? Where does the money that you make go? Even facilitators or shamans. But yeah, it's been very interesting to navigate, because it's I don't believe that we can say money, our medicines should all be free. Especially, I always say, go try to make ayahuasca yourself and see. It's I've pounded the ayahuasca before, and it's actually a lot of human labor involved. And those humans, they're still buying gasoline for their scooters, which people forget. It's there's very few humans that are fully living off the land without any money. It's there's still so much that we don't know about. Like you said, we glamorize this indigenous way of living when there's still realities to this. But I want to hear a little bit more about, I know, you do a lot of other work in the world, and you mentioned you lead retreats, and I know you have upcoming class. If you can share with us a little bit more about your current work, and also what's coming up over the next, 6 to 12 months, and, where do you see yourself going in this psychedelic ecosystem here?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I do have some fun stuff cooking up. So I do have retreats that involve deep medicine transformation in Peru and in Costa Rica coming up. And I've been most recently working with a dear friend and teacher of mine, Puma Quispe Sangoma, in Peru. And so we've got that going on. And then I'm also continuing to teach about preparation and integration, both individually and also through online courses. So I have a course coming up with the Shift Network on this topic. And in particular, I'm focusing on some of the flavors I most love to bring to the work, which is all about love, compassion, forgiveness, and how that's really the medicine. That's really the key. And the plants and the ceremonies help open those doorways. They facilitate. But how to really maximize our access to the transformational power of love, and also of prayer. That's something that I love to reinvigorate for people and make it current and alive and fresh. And we have so many these kind of old associations that are not really, don't work for us. So what does? How to make the power of prayer really alive, really connected, and really personal and really true. And also, we're going to be talking about, how to work with challenging experiences that come up, and shadow work and different energies and entities, and bringing in Buddhist meditation practices and philosophies to work with the mind and to work with consciousness. And we'll talk about sacred reciprocity and how to walk this path with integrity, and also integration. How do we live it and embody it? So that course is coming up it's coming up in April, so we're going to be starting soon. And yeah, that's what I always have my music available online as well. So you can always access that. And that's such a great way to bring some of the energy and the teachings of the medicine into just our daily lives.
So beautiful. And I love it. You said, embody the integration. This is the point. It's not I always say, it's not something you just do after one ceremony. It's the day to day. It's the moment to moment. And this is the whole work. It's like these medicines, they're beautiful, they're wonderful, but it's the day to day. It's like bringing it back to your life, bringing it back to shine your light in the world. And like you said, radiate that love, because that is the medicine. That's what this is all about. This is all it comes back to. It's like the root. So I'm so glad you shared that. And Allie, we'll have the links to your upcoming course, your music, your website, and anything else that you want to share, we'll have right here in the show notes. Thank you so much for this work that you do and sharing your unique medicine in the world. I really appreciate meeting you and having you here.
Thanks so much, Beth. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I look forward to more.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.